Hi, Beverly here again with the Beverly Gale channel and the series on coping with blindness. I've talked to a lot of people who really don't understand what macular degeneration is. They kind of have an idea, but when you go online and you Google what is AMD, you get a lot of very technical descriptions with a lot of very technical names. And most people kind of zone out because they don't understand it anyway. So I'd like to make a video that kind of gives you a concept of what AMD is without all of the technical jargon. Is it scientific? No. But when I've discussed it with people, they say, now I get it. So maybe it's not scientific. But the whole idea is for you to get an understanding of exactly what it means when you are diagnosed with AMD. And there goes the coffee pot. Anyway, as you all know, AMD causes different forms of blindness. There is different types of AMD. And AMD, for those of you just tuning in that aren't familiar, it's called age-related macular degeneration. And the macula is a part of the eye. There's a number of parts to the eye which I don't want to go into. What I want to tell you is that there are several things you need to know about the eye. You need to know that there is a screen back there. They call it the macula. You need a way to focus your eyes, and you need a way for light to enter and focus those eyes so that you can see. And the way the light enters and the way the eye focuses is twofold. One, what they call the central vision is a form of focus. Now the central vision is what is mostly affected with AMD. And that's the part of the vision where we do the fine-tune work, the reading, the ability to thread a needle, to fix, for women, to sew, to be able to do all the things we don't think about when we have sight. That's your central vision. The other part of your vision is your peripheral vision. And if you ever remember going and getting your car test, your driving test, you get a peripheral vision test when you're there. And it basically is they want you to see a light, or maybe they hold up fingers. It depends on where you go. But the bottom line is there is the peripheral where you're seeing everything out here. And then there is that central vision where you're just focusing in. So you need to know that as far as it goes. Do you need to know all the different technicalities on how it works? I don't think so. I think you just need to understand what's happening when you have age-related macular degeneration. Several things happen. One of them is as you are first diagnosed, if you are diagnosed with early stage, the chances are it's dry macular degeneration. And then if you're diagnosed with where you've bled and you no longer see, and you see like gray or black spots in the center of your vision, that's wet macula. And they are totally different. And I was sitting in my doctor's office in the waiting room yesterday, and a husband and wife were talking, and she is showing him a pamphlet, and she says, see, macular degeneration is black spots. Do you see black spots? And he said, no. And I wanted to jump in and explain, but I held my mouth because obviously he was new to this. She was trying to explain it based on a pamphlet that they received. But she was incorrect because 85% of macular degeneration starts with the dry macula. So let's talk about the symptoms really quickly. The symptoms for dry macula is that little by little you're seeing less and less. You need more and more light to see. Your glasses may be changing more regularly, and everything starts to fuzz out. That's the dry. And if you check with one of my other videos where I talk a little bit about that, it'll go into more detail. But let's talk about what happens with that dry macular degeneration. One of the first things I learned was my dad, who had dry macular degeneration, and he kind of explained it this way. He said, it's like if you had a silk veil put over your face and you still could see through it. Well, now Another veil goes over that, and you can still see through it, but you need a little light to see better. And then a third veil goes through it, but you need a little more light, but yeah, you can still see it. But the more veils that come across your face, the harder it is to see. And the more light that gets in there. And finally, everything gets so fuzzy that it just kind of grays out. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was to use an analogy rather than the eyeball, because it's so complex. It has so many different moving parts. But here's how, if I were to give you my artist rendition of how this works, I will attempt to do that. In the eye, you have a way to see color and contrast that's called the rods and the cones. And if you go back into biology, most of us had biology, a very long time ago. But you might remember the terms, the rods and the cones from the eyes. Well, that is a very important part of the macular, being able to not only read, but to be able to discern colors. And those particular things are kind of waving at the top of where the eye focuses. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this not as an eyeball, but as a field of wheat. And that wheat is waving in the breeze. Those things waving at the top of the wheat, we can all picture that. Those are the rods and the cones. Okay, now this field of wheat has an irrigation system that's underground. And so when it's healthy, it's getting enough water, everything's growing properly, and everything is working, just like an eyeball. But something happens to the underground system, and the water won't shut off. Now, I'm going to make that analogy as part of what they call the wet macula, the bleeding part of the eye. Now, when that happens, the water is coming up underneath because it's an underground irrigation, just like blood is coming in behind the eyeball, and it is flooding, and it is raising the surface of the soil. Now, as the surface of the soil gets raised and the water filters through it, several things happen. In an eyeball, when that happens, it's called bleeding, and it also can causes blind spots. Well, what's happening in the wheat is that what happens when we overwater a plant? Some of the soil actually lifts from the top of the soil plot, doesn't it? And that soil is now that little debris is being raised above where the top of the wheat is. Okay, now that debris is called drusen. In the eyeball, it is bits and pieces of cells that have broken away and are floating around inside the eye. Now, what happens, and when I talk about the veil going over the face, that's the drusen dispersing. It's like fine soil, and it disperses all throughout the eyeball. You can still see through it, but it's getting harder and harder. Now, what happens when a lot of the debris is going like this? What happens? Some of it sticks together, just like mud. That's the same thing happening with drusen. Well, why is it happening? Well, in biology, if you go back again, you'll remember that all cells are alive, and all cells have to be fed, so they eat, and what do? They excrete. And there is a group of cells. I'm not going to go ahead. The name is macrophage. It doesn't matter. The point is this. I call them Pac-Men. And those Pac-Men, if you remember the game Pac-Man, they're always going along and they're getting things. Munch, 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 munch. The Pac-Man cells in the body clean everything out so that we don't have a massive garbage dump in our body. But something happens in the eye where those little Pac-Men, I don't know, maybe they get old and they just become arthritic, whatever their problem, they stop cleaning up the debris. And that debris, just like the soil that filtered up through the shafts of wheat, the debris begins to float around, but there are no Pac-Men to clean it up. And so it begins to actually cause a problem within the center of the eyeball, and eventually even around the sides, but primarily in the center of the eyeball, or in where the shafts of wheat are growing. It causes a problem. And the bigger the problem, the harder it is to see. Because if you take those drusen and you layer them over and over all around, all of a sudden you have blind spots. And they're usually in the center of the eye because that's kind of where the drusen keeps its shape. It stays within the center part around the eye, around the macula. So if you are beginning to have macular degeneration, you will notice your eyesight beginning to gradually decrease. And you will also notice that you need more light to read. That's called a contrast problem. That is very common in macular degeneration. And as your macular degeneration, dry macula, begins to get worse, sometimes you bleed, because 15%, I think 10 to 15% of all people with dry macula bleed. That's the wet, and that can cause instant blindness wherever it bleeds. And if you go back to the analogy of the soil, where it bulges up, now here's where the Amsler chart, when they tell you to take home an Amsler chart and look at it with each eye, look at the point in the center of the graph, and if you see wavy lines, get back to them. Because that is sections of where the soil, or in this case, the macula, is bulging because of blood coming up from underneath, or in this case, soil, and the irrigation pops it up. And it's the same idea as looking through a glass of water and distorted vision that way. But the more blood that gets in there, or the more water that filters up through that wheat, it stops light from coming through. And when it stops the light, that stops your vision. So I hope this made a little bit of sense to you. I welcome your comments. You can ask questions. I would be more than happy to answer them. Am I technical? I don't think so. But I try to give analogies, and I have done this all my life. It's just something that comes naturally to me. When people ask me a question about anything, I think of a way to explain it that's totally different, but gives them the point. And I hope by explaining this definition to you, that kind of you got a little bit of an understanding of, you know what? I kind of get it now. Because that's what people, when I've talked about AMD to them, and I've done these crazy explanations, I kind of get it now. So I hope you got it. And please, if you enjoyed this, please give me a like and share it with your friends. Until next time, I'm Beverly Gale, and hope to talk to you again soon. Bye for now.